And then, hear that? Hear that? Okay. So you gotta turn that on. Okay.
Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Ann Tamaki Dion, and on behalf of the Friends of the Topaz Museum, I'd like to welcome you here today for our program, Irei, presented by Duncan Ryuken Williams. This is our third event this year, and we encourage you to attend future events that are listed on our flyer, as well as on the Friends of the Topaz Museum website. If you are interested in learning more about the Topaz Museum, there are 4 board members here today: Diane Fukami, Kaya Tabe, Patricia Wakita, and myself, and we'd be happy to talk to you. Today is also the last day of Lucy Irei's exhibit, so please take the opportunity to view the art in the J-Sei gallery. I'd like to thank the Japanese American Community Foundation for their support of the Friends of the Topaz Museum Speaker Series. And a special thanks today to J-Sei for the use of their facility. And now, here is Jane Yamashiro, the author of Redefining Japanese-ness, Japanese Americans in the Ancestral Homeland, who will introduce our speaker.
Good afternoon. It is an honor and a pleasure for me to introduce Duncan Williams today. Duncan was, over 10 years ago, Duncan generously hosted me at USC when I was working on my first book. Organizing events together and observing Duncan's leadership style, I learned a lot. Duncan is definitely one of the most organized, ambitious, and capable people that I've ever met. And on top of that, he's a wonderfully kind human being. And on top of that, let me tell you briefly about some of his academic accomplishments. Duncan Ryuken Williams is currently Professor of Religion, as well as American Studies and Ethnicity, and Director of the Ito Center for Japanese Religions and Culture at the University of Southern California. Williams's latest publication is Sutra and Bible: Faith and the World War II Japanese American Incarceration, based on an exhibit he curated last year at the Japanese American National Museum. His monographs include American Sutra, on sale here, A Story of Faith and Freedom in the Second World War, published by Harvard University Press, the winner of the 2022 Grawemeyer Religion Award, and an LA Times bestseller. And he's also published The Other Side of Zen with Princeton University Press. He is also the editor of 7 volumes on race and American belonging, or Buddhist studies, including Hapa Japan, Issei Buddhism in the Americas, American Buddhism, and Buddhism and Ecology. He was the founding executive vice president of Japan House LA and serves on the boards of organizations ranging from the Yonex Corporation, the Harvard Pluralism Project, and Tricycle Magazine. His most recent project, which we will be hearing about today, is the building of the Irei Names Monument. This was funded by the Mellon Foundation's Monuments Project and is a memorial to honor those of Japanese ancestry who were incarcerated in America's internment and concentration camps during World War II. Now, without further ado, please help me welcome Duncan Williams to J-Sei and our community here in the East Bay.
Okay, well, thank you so much for turning up in person at an event like this. I really appreciate the interest, and I hope I can present about the project and take your questions and have a conversation with Jane and then with all of you as well. So, as Jane kindly mentioned, I have the responsibility of being the principal investigator for this project. And what I wanted to do today was maybe speak to you for about 45 minutes or 50 minutes, something like that, and then be in a conversation with Jane and then take your questions. And I think the format that I wanted to follow was, I think that there's a Zoom audience out there as well. And so I'm going to be occasionally kind of going back and forth between talking to you and talking, I think, to a camera over here, so that people who are online can also participate in this conversation. But am I projecting properly? Can you hear me in the back? Okay, perfect. Okay, so the way I'm going to try to structure my lecture today is to talk about 5 different facets or 5 gates or entry points to thinking about this World War II monument. And I'm going to try to give you a sense both of the specifics about what this Japanese American incarceration monument is all about, but also try to get a little bit of a sense of monuments kind of writ large, thinking about them not only in terms of America and what we need to do in terms of thinking through the history of this country, but also monuments kind of in a broader sense about memory and about structures of monuments, how they get created, and what our approach has been to thinking through a monument. And I've been very influenced, and it's reflected in the name Irei Monument Project, through monuments that were built by incarcerees and internees themselves back in World War II. I think most of you in this audience would probably know of the well-known Ireto monument at the cemetery area at Manzanar. There's the Ireto Amachi in Colorado, as well as the Irei at Rower. All of them were created by clergy of the time, Reverend Wada in Amachi, Reverend Hayashima Daitetsu in Rower, and then Reverend Shinjo Nagatomi. It's his calligraphy that adorns the monument at Manzanar. And Reverend Nagatomi's son was my professor in graduate school, and it was through him that I became first exposed to even just the history of the World War II Japanese American incarceration. And I wanted to just note at the top that it's not that I have a personal family connection to this history like many of you here. I was born and raised in Japan to a Japanese mother and a British father, and when I was 17 I immigrated to the US. So when I was going to high school in Japan, and we didn't really get exposed very much to this history. This was only when my professor Masatoshi Nagatomi at Harvard, who was the first professor of Buddhist studies at that university, passed away in my last year of finishing my doctoral dissertation, that I was helping the family sort through some things in his office, and that's when I came across these yellowed pieces of paper that had the name Nagatomi on it, but I could tell. I used to have to take his Japanese writings and then translate them into English. I was like, it says Nagatomi, it's not his handwriting. And it turned out it was his father, the Buddhist priest, Reverend Shinjo Nagatomi, his writings from Manzanar. Daily records, like a diary, as well as drafts of sermons that he delivered in Manzanar. And that was, at this point, maybe 20-some years ago, that I came across these and started, just as a favor to the family who asked me to translate it from Japanese into English, I started translating this particular Buddhist priest's diaries, and of course mention of the Manzanar Ireto came up, and how, as a Buddhist priest, he had to, especially that first year, apparently, I guess, the barracks were hastily constructed, not so well built, and the people who were, vulnerable, like the elderly and young and babies, also passed away. And Reverend Nagatomi talked about in his writings about his time, how he just felt something to do the funerals and memorial services having to do it so frequently during the first year, and that he became very determined to build a monument by the time of Obon of 1943. In the Buddhist tradition, they have this thing called Nibon. The first Obon after somebody dies is somehow charged, or it's very important. So I think he wanted to do something, and he worked together. It was like an interfaith effort, because obviously it wasn't just Buddhist people who passed away in camp, but he worked with a Catholic architect, Ryozo Kado, who was well known in Southern California for building Japanese American Catholic institutions, and then worked with a Protestant pastor for the opening ceremony for August 15, 1943, when this monument was dedicated. And so a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is kind of inspired by what his feelings and towards what it means to remember somebody at a time when the government seemed not to pay attention or care about the people. He wanted to make sure people were not simply forgotten. And so I think I'm going to try to talk what it means from my understanding of his work, as well as the work of Reverend Hayashima, Reverend Wada, other people, of this word Irei. In the Japanese character means to console. Rei means spirit. And then To and Manzanar and Amachi means a tower, and Hi just means a structure. But a structure or a tower to console the spirits of those who've come before, those who've passed away most recently, but in fact, ancestors, anyone that has passed on before us, and how to honor them. And so that's kind of, I just wanted to mention that at the beginning as to why this project is called the Irei Project to begin with. And it has three forms as monuments, and we're trying to do something in this project to rethink what it means to have a monument. I think typically we tend to think of certain types of monuments as having their value come from the fact that they are permanent structures. The granite stone monuments, the bigger it is, the more permanent it is, the more value it has. And I wanted to kind of question that a little bit and think about monuments in a little bit different way, especially inspired by Reverend Nagatomi, kind of from a Buddhist vantage point. And so as I go through the talk, I think you'll see where this stuff it resonates. But I've tried to think about a monument in different formats that are doing different things. And today I'm going to focus on the first of the three aspects or facets of the monument project, the Irei-cho, the book of names. And what that means and what we're trying to do there. But it's a monument project where we are making our best effort to account for every single person of Japanese ancestry who is incarcerated in any one of the 75 different WRA, WCCA, DOJ, Army camps of World War II for however long or short a period of time. And we came up with a book that has 125,284 names in it, with the expectation that while we are pretty confident that we're 99%, we're as accurate as possible, not leaving anybody out, we may have left people out. We may have misspelled somebody's middle name. We try not to, but what if we're wrong by 1%, some percentage? It's a book of names that we want to actually, rather than for it to be permanent, we want it to be changing. And I'll talk more about what that means in a moment, but the main way we want it to be changing is that we want people to let us know if there's anyone missing, any name that's misspelled, because I think we don't honor people if we don't have a full accounting, but also if we spell people's names wrong. And so much of our work with the government list, we found that there's just so many errors in how people's names were rendered. And we have been undertaking great efforts to try to correct that. So that's part of our monument idea, is that it's not only about remembrance, but about repair. It's repairing this historical moment through different acts of monumentalizing. And so I did want to just talk about the other two, which I won't really focus on today, but as future aspects of the project that we're rolling out. The Irei Zo, the character for Kura, or storehouse, it just means this kind of archive of knowledge. So one of the projects we're working on, and it's a beta version is up already at www.ireizo.com, but its official launch is going to happen in October of this year. But you'll see that it's not just the name, because in the Book of Names, it's just the name, isn't it? We've sequenced it by, date of birth, so the oldest person, a 90-some-year-old person's the first name, a baby born in Crystal City camp in Texas in 1946. It was the last of the camps to close, the last baby born there is the name, that's the last name in the book. But as names, I think they're powerful. But with the online art, we're trying to encourage people to learn more about the person behind the name. So you learn about all the different camps that they were in, and we're working currently with Densho, which I think, again, I don't have to explain to this group, a very important organization that has so many photographs, oral histories, digitized scans of camp newsletters, and we're tagging everything that's in the DDR, or the Densho Digital Repository, to be linked with the Ireizo site. So when you come to ireizo.com, there's a plaque with the name of the person, the birth year, and the camps they were in, but then you can flip the card and have thumbnails to all of their, if that person has an oral history, if there are images, photographs, and so forth, that you can access all of that as well. So that's what the online archive is. And finally, the light sculptures, we're building them at the various sites. We've slowly started to have memorandums of understanding to deliver to each one site that has a museum or a visitor center and so forth, to have these. This is not official yet, but I can just share it with this group. But we're going to be sourcing these very large washi, or traditional Japanese paper things, and we're going to basically, like Shigeru Ban builds washi houses, we're going to be building a washi sculpture, one that you can enter, and it's going to be in the different, they have different ceiling heights, and we can modify it accordingly. But we're going to be laser cutting names into these paper sculptures where we, using light technology, will be having all these names kind of like their shadows falling upon those who enter the sculpture. And so that's the vision for the light sculptures, which we're planning to build and offer to each site of confinement. So that's to come, but I wanted to give you a preview that that's the goal, is to have 3 different facets of the project. So let me now focus on the first one, this Irei. It's the one that maybe some of you know, I've already visited in Los Angeles. It's right now on display at the Japanese American National Museum. And it should be there until December of 2024. And after that display, we're currently in conversations with other institutions to maybe have it on display thereafter elsewhere. Eventually, we're gifting, it'll go back to the National Museum, but I just want to talk a little bit about this book. It's over 1,000 pages. As I mentioned, it's just the names. And we had a process in the making of it where we tried to be attentive to a couple different factors. One, which was, as I mentioned, we're trying to make sure that it's not like a phone book. It's not, people are not data. Like sometimes, names projects, it can just feel like it's just like data. And we wanted to, how do we make sure we honor people as individuals? Because to us, it felt like part of the problem of why, what happened to the Japanese American community in contradistinction to, let's say, the Italian American community or the German American community, which was, the United States was also at war with Nazi Germany, in fact, as well as Imperial Japan. But it wasn't as if every German, all the time were around it. It was only the Japanese American community that experienced that kind of, I think Carl Bendiston put it most, it's an ugly way to put it, but he said, anyone with a single drop of Japanese blood, I want them in camp. And he was referring to mixed race babies at an orphanage run by the Maryknoll church in the Catholic church in Los Angeles, where, at that time, because of anti-miscegenation laws and whatnot, sometimes mixed race kids were put up for adoption and that kind of thing. He said even they are subject to Executive Order 906. That didn't happen with the German and Italian American communities. And people were treated like some undifferentiated grouping associated with the enemy. And it didn't matter if you were a little baby in an orphanage or an infirm grandmother, or everyone was subject to forcibly being removed from their homes and incarcerated. So it seemed to us like giving people's individuality, the personhood, the names, that seemed to be something that was at our minds about how do we make a monument that would kind of do the reverse of what the government did back then. And so I mentioned something about the impermanence of, permanent versus where does the value come? One of the ideas we had in the making of the book and the design of it and the sizing, and in terms of the design, we reached out to Burton Hasebe. He's, every year there's a list of like 100 top, graphic designers in the United States. He's the only Asian American on the list. But he created a special font for us. And with names, you don't want the names to kind of bleed into each other. And so you need something to divide it. It's called a glyph. But he designed a glyph, a 5-line thing based on the 5-tiered stupa, or I'll talk more about this in a minute. The Manzanar Ireto is based on this kind of old Japanese cultural monument style of building things in these 5 tiers. So we had these 5 lines in there. And so we had his work, we had the work of John Sueda and Chris Hamamoto here in the Bay Area, Chris is now in Seoul, teaching at Seoul National University, but he was on the faculty at CCA, and John is the Dean of Design at California College of the Arts. So we try to get the best creative artist people to work together. And my wife is the creative director of this, and she tried to work with all these different people to design this thing so that we could do something. And I wanted to go back one step and just mention one other thing. There are these, it's a little bit hard to see, but there are these ceramic pieces in the frontispiece and the back of the book monument. I wonder if I have a better, no. Okay. That's a project, actually some of you were directly involved in this project that we kind of put a call out to different camp survivors and descendants and people working on preservation, education, to go out and retrieve a small amount of soil from every one of those 75 different sites, all the assembly centers, all the WRA camps, all the Department of Justice and all the INS and Army sites. And we had a ceramicist, John Hasegawa. I think maybe some of you know, he's cousins with Mitch Homa from the Amachi Alliance, Community Alliance. So anyway, everybody got involved. And he's a wonderful ceramicist, and he put the soil a little bit from all the different camps into this clay to make these thin ceramic pieces that are embedded on the front and the back of the book of names, so that it is kind of framed as a national project, all of these sands in one place. And in Shikoku Island, like I think some of you know, in Japanese cultural traditions, sometimes if you go to like Saigoku or Shikoku, like when you go on pilgrimage, sometimes you can't make all 88 temples or whatever. And there'll be one temple where the soil from all the sites are in one place. And you visit that one place, it's as if you visited everywhere else. So that was, part of the concept for this thing was if you go on pilgrimage to the Irei, then it's as if you've done this big national pilgrimage and you're with the people that went to all these different places. And so we had soil from, there's for Alaska to Hawaii to all the well-known WRA camps, but some of these little known camps, Fort Sill in Oklahoma, and the Boston INS site in Massachusetts, and we just collected the soil from all these places, and it's embedded in the book. And the notion was that if people come to see the book, that we want everybody acknowledged. There are people who died in camp, who were maybe never got married, never kids, who don't have descendants. And so our project was, let's ask people to put a small, like a hanko or a Japanese seal, it's just a self-sealing blue dot, but it's a mark. It's like leaving, when you go on pilgrimage, a small stone at a great, something like that. Leave something as a form of acknowledgement on the page itself. And that we would start by inviting everyone that comes to it. And you don't have to be Japanese. Anyone can come. The next name in the book, again, is ordered from the oldest, so 18, whatever, put a acknowledgement. And if you are Japanese American and you have a connection to this history and you want to acknowledge a brother or a mother or aunt, then you can put marks in the rest of the book. And so we began this in September. This is a picture from the opening ceremony day. But we have now gone through several tens of thousands of names of people being acknowledged in the book. And therefore each page changes. It's actually anyone who participates is actually making the monument the monument. So it's not like we made it's everyone's participation that's actually physically changing the monument. The other day, there's somebody who came and one of the other people on staff, like, she noticed there was the page on the a little bit on the edge was wet, and she was worried that somebody spilled something. But it turns out somebody was looking at their mother's name and started crying. And I'm like, you know, those tears are now part of the monument as well. So the monument is changing because of people's attention. And so that's our kind of theory of monuments, is that it's not about something objective, far off, like grandeur is better. It's something about something intimate of coming to contact with individual people and the memories that get associated. So that's one aspect of the project that I wanted to mention. And it comes from, again, I'm also a Buddhist priest. This is unrelated, you know, but I think about, you know, we use the word Nembutsu. People generally think when we say the word Nembutsu, you're reciting the Buddha's name, right? But Anusmriti, the original meaning of that, it actually has nothing to do with verbalizing. It's actually got to do with imagining the Buddha's died, and you visualize or imagine the Buddha, and by so doing, you make the absent present again. And later in time, that visualization turned to recitation. And you start by evoking, recalling a name, you make somebody present again. And so for me, that was something very important as to the background, as to why names, why do this. Because, and the other thing, obviously, is that, you know, the government of the time, you know, people got numbered, you know, people were treated, I think, not as individual persons, but as this collective. And that whole idea of just being a number, that's why I was talking about, like, let's not make this a database. Let's not make this a phone book. It's not about number, you know, because the earliest history of Japanese immigrants, you know, is in Hawaii on the sugar plantations, and they didn't want to bother with, you know, Yamamoto, Yamaguchi. It's too simple. So they gave people these little, they call them bango, which just means number. They just got these bango. They were just numbers. And so I was like, that's the way dehumanization works. And so look, what is it that we can do to humanize people again? And so we have these big lists, you know. I just was looking at the Taitetsuno, one of our family friend, Reverend Duno's family, from the rower camp. As you can see, it's kind of just like a phone book, you know. So I was like, how do we take something like that and create something worthy of a monument? And our project began, of course, with, we can't have a names monument unless you have the names. And we, as I mentioned, we are still in an ongoing way, amending and making from 99% to 99.9, you know, close to 100, as accurate as possible. And one of the things that we did, of course, was not only look at the well-known camp rosters, like of the War Relocation Authority camps. Each one of them had what they called a final accountability roster. It purported to contain, in a kind of finalized format, all of the names of every single person that went to that particular camp. It's not always true. There are people missing, etc. But more or less, that's a very well-known document for researchers, as well as something called Form 26, which is an entry form that was in 1942. So these were created in 1945. The entry form is 1942. Of course, people were, you know, babies were born in camp, and people who were paroled in from other camps. So those lists are different. And so one of the things we started to realize was we have to create a record of names that actually is accurate. And we didn't even at that point know exactly the number we would end up with, you know, because some people, you know, in you know, well-respected institutions like the Japanese American, I've seen 110,000, I've seen 120,000, 125,000. It's all slightly guesstimation, with redress, yes, 81,000 checks went out. So we have some ideas, but Office of Redistribution didn't make a master list. I was talking to some of the staffers there, and they were like, Duncan, we didn't have Excel back then. And, they had paper files that were flying in. It was like very busy. So nobody's ever created a comprehensive and accurate full-on list. And so to do so, we tried to look not only at the well-known camp rosters, but things like this. It's I think this is Lordsburg, New Mexico, both government lists, but also ones that were created by the internees themselves, often in the Japanese language. Sometimes even the Hawaii people had their own Hawaii Japanese language list of people in different camps. So we tried to do this kind of layering process of looking at all these different type of lists to compare. What does the Japanese kanji say? What does the English language romanization say? How do we make sure things are accurate, especially when we know it's the same person, but their names are rendered a little bit differently? And how do we come up with accurate names? And so we looked at these type of jinmeibo, jinmeiroku, and things like that. This is something from Fort Lincoln, and lists that were created, just sometimes big lists, small lists, private lists, public lists. And eventually we decided the theory behind how we're going to is this. I think if you go to a Buddhist temple, typically, usually on the right hand side, it's up near the altar. There should be a book of names. It's called kakocho, and literally just means kako means past, and cho means register your book. But it's when we have like shotsuki hoyo, like a monthly memorial service or something, we'll chant all the names, of the people who are in the book of names. It seemed to me that this is the kind of like way that people in Japan, culturally have been thinking about names and its importance and keeping records and putting it in a book. But of course, it's not about death, because we have camp survivors. I think even in this room, right? We have camp survivors. And so it can't be about death remembrance. So it's got to be not a memorial in that sense, but it's a memory of something that is about community and about accounting for a community's experience of incarceration. And so, of course, we ended up, sequencing people by date of birth, because not everybody's how would we know? There's no way to research that, right? So, but we found that we could research where people were born, when people were born, and so this is the way we decided to put it together. The second kind of gate, or the second way we tried to think about this. So the first had to do with this idea of like recalling the past and book of names and so forth. The second way was we thought about the idea of karma, and the idea that it's not just that individuals have karma. You do something good or and then there's a consequence. But maybe collective, like families, but even maybe like nations can have karma. And one of the people that I really respected who talked about this was Reverend Kyoshiro Tokunaga. He was, I think maybe some of you, he served San Jose Betsuin for a long time before he passed away. He was a Rinban there for quite a while, so you may know him. He was the only Issei on the NCJAR lawsuit, during redress. But he was somebody who talked a lot about what he called the karma of the nation. He was, arrested and went through the whole DOJ camp experience, and he was very ill during his trip first trip out and on the train, and an African American porter helped nurse him back to health. And part of it was not just physically attending to him, but they started talking about their respective communities and the history of the country and the challenges that both communities faced around exclusion and second-class citizenship and all of that. And he said that made him really feel something about the karma of a nation, that it can be, good things can be transmitted down, but also negative karmic things can be transmitted down. And that we felt like, oh, okay, to do a monument right, we need to do something about transformation. Something about taking the negative karmic things that get transmitted through these type of difficult experiences, and how can we make a monument that's not just like, okay, there's a monument, fine, but do something that's transformative. And so that's also been kind of at the background as to how and why we should do this. And the reason is because this history is long. It occurred to us that it's not just that, let's say, African Americans have faced, racial barrier, but that, let's say, even among Asian Americans, some of this language around exclusion based on race or religion, goes back to exclusion period and the Chinese Exclusion Act, and talk about buildings of walls and buildings, establishment of a heathen Chinese despotism and so forth. That new Florida law that DeSantis just passed around alien, ownership of land. These things seem to repeat itself karmically, right? America sometimes swings towards a notion of it being a white Christian nation, and other times it swings open, a multi-ethnic and religiously plural and free nation. And we seem to, as a nation, go back and forth. And it's the work of different people that make it go one way or another. And so we were like, what can a monument do that can make it maybe swing towards a different direction? And so we were also informed and inspired, obviously by Japanese, and I mentioned some Buddhist, ideas, but we also found inspiration in other monument projects like the one in Alabama. I think many of you may have heard it colloquially referred to as a lynching memorial. It's called the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. Brian Stevenson and others from the Equal Justice Initiative, EJI, have worked for years on documenting that kind of racial terror and trauma and of lynching in America. And they have similar kinds of efforts of research, right, county by county in the South, to make sure everybody's names were listed right. But also, they had their own theory about soil, collecting, where from the very sites that these lynchings happened, where the blood was spilled, kind of seeped into the ground, like collecting soil and honoring names. And so we were very, appreciative and informed by that project as well. So moving on from kind of karma and collective karma and how we're all interlinked and connected as an American community and what we can do about these histories, I want to move to the third gate about, I call it, cooking or, like how do we take the ingredients that we have and cook them into something that's worthy. And so in my tradition, I'm a Soto Zen Buddhist priest, so our founder in Japan, Dogen, from 1200 to 1253, he wrote a text called Tenzo Kyokun. It's a manual for cooks. And in the monastery, you have the abbot, and the second highest ranked person is the cook. And their main responsibility, number one, is to know what is in the monastic kitchen, like, what's the inventory. If you have some daikon that's going, you have to make takuan. Takuan, the pickled, daikon, is named after Zen Master Takuan. he's a well-known Zen teacher who learned how to pickle daikon well. It's about not wasting anything and using what's there and so forth. But anyway, Dogen's idea was, number one, you should know what's there as a cook, and then you should take what you have and make the best meal possible out of it. And so what he did was he said, look, anyone can make, if you have great ingredients, anyone can make something, decent. But a good cook is somebody who can take even like a little bit rotting, like a little bit not that great ingredients, and still make something good, and not just for yourself, but for everyone in the monastery. And so I realized that idea is so deep in Japanese culture, and deep even in monument making during World War II. Reverend Hayashima in Rower, what he did when they built the monument in Rower, the Irei, they took from the fence line, barbed wire. They took some of the rebar, the iron, and they used it to retain integrity for their monument. It's also based on a gorinto, or a 5-tier monument, which is a Buddhist kind of like traditional monument building technique. But he took that, the very things, the fence, the barbed wire, the things that were incarcerating, and used it to transform. It's like using rotting daikon or something. Like, how do you transform it into something that's actually of benefit to others? So that became also a part of our thinking about what can we do to do things. And so people, I think, made wood, and this is an ojuzu made from peach pits that people, collected. This is a DOJ camp where they had a ration of 1 piece of fruit per week. This person, collected the peach pits until they could make one. And so, anyway, so I wanted to, am I over time?
Never.
No, are we still okay? I'm sorry, okay. So I want to, I've got two more things to say. So the fourth case, the 5 tiers I was mentioning, gogyo. These 5 tiers are based on, classically in Japan, the 5 elements or the 5 phases: fire, wood, water, metal. King it says gold, but it means metal more broadly, in earth. And you can see in this is an original kind of like draft drawing of the Manzanar Ireto. It's built on this kind of gorinto structure, the 5 tiers. And this kind of, it has a very old correlative in Japanese culture of remembering those who've gone before through the building of these gorinto, these 5-tier structures. Each of them are associated with these 5 elements. And what we tried to do, this is a better picture of those ceramic pieces, that contain the soil, all of those things. But in this sotoba, which is Japanese way of saying the Sanskrit word stupa, which is often if you go to Japan, we go to a typical Japanese, cemetery, you'll find these wooden pieces, and usually they have these 5 little notches, each with a Sanskrit siddham or character, and the last one is soil. So that's where we put the soil for each camp. And we made these sotoba that surround the irecho with the name in Japanese and English, and the soil from each camp. And so we surrounded, physically, the book today is surrounded by the soil, not just the ones that are integrated into the clay, but you can see it's like the red volcanic soil from Hawaii, and this other kind of soil. Each soil is a little bit different. And I would recommend, if you ever have a chance, to take a look at the differences in the soil. But we tried to do those 5 elements with the overall philosophy, and this is the last one, the last of the 5 gates, of using that gold, that element of kintsugi, which is, I think, not something I have to go into deep depth with this group, but kin obviously means gold. Tsugi comes from the verb tsugu, to join again. And so it's, from the ceramic repair tradition where if you break a favorite teacup or a plate or something like that, instead of throwing it away, you rejoin it using lacquer. And then instead of hiding the cracks, you adorn it with gold. And in some ways, it marks the history of that teacup and so on. So we try to envelop that kind of idea that this is a monument project, not just about remembrance, but about, in some sense, healing the past. And I was mentioning to Satsuki a moment ago about somebody who is 102 years old came the other day to the Irei and how she saw her name in the book of names and didn't want to put the stamp on her own name. She wanted to honor her, brother and sisters and parents. She came with her children, grandchildren, and even a great-grandchild. I think she was 7 years old. And she had that great-grandchild put the stamp on her name. Oh. And I was like, oh, that's how healing works. That's how family history gets told and transmitted over generations. And there's something that is, yes, those lines of hurt might transmit as lineages and lines, but there's something that we can do to adorn that. And for us, we thought maybe, inviting people to come and do this stamping is one way to do that kind of healing. So we want to heal correct repair the historical record, but also have that kind of more emotional kind of way of bringing things to some kind of sense of Kanji Sahara, who's in the, he would say things like, oh, now that was proof I was there, or other camps have said similar type of things about of how just seeing their names in the book or their parents' names or something has some form of bringing maybe even their larger family together. We've had people come to LA, like Seattle cousins and Chicago. We're all going to fly to LA and do, Thanksgiving together, and then we'll go to the Irei together. Things like that. So that's been some of the experience I wanted to share with you. A little bit of the. We don't necessarily talk about all this in the exhibit or anything like that. So I wanted to share with this group a little bit of the background and some context as to what we're trying to achieve with this. I don't know how successful, but what we're trying to do with the project that I think is a little bit, we're trying to challenge a little bit what a monument can be, and we want it to be one that it's about your participation that actually gives it significance and value. And so with that, let me close and then ask Jane to come up. Maybe I wasn't supposed to do that, maybe. Sorry, Jane. Please.
Okay. Thank you, Duncan. I know I learned a lot. I'm sure we all did. It's wonderful to hear about your project. We wanted to give everyone a chance to ask questions because Duncan is here live in person, and it's a great opportunity. It's a great opportunity to ask him questions about the project, about what he talked about here, whatever you would like to ask. Please don't be shy. We have a couple of microphones. The only thing that I'll warn you is that we want to remember to include our wonderful Zoom audience. And so we do want to make sure all the questions get asked with a microphone. So any questions you might have, please feel free. And I believe we can also take questions from the Zoom folks too, right?
Oh, hi, thank you very much. Duncan, thank you so much for providing this context and for all the thought you've put into this. And I'm just really moved by your presentation and by the project. And my wife is sitting up here, and we've been talking about getting to Los Angeles so that we can stamp the book. I have a question. At one point you talked about the karma of the nation and how you hope that this project might be transformative. And I think you meant for the nation.
Very important activist in the kind of Japanese kind of community to have gender equality. And at that time, when I was born in Japan, you could only, be only if you have a Japanese father, or males could pass down nationality in Japan. And so in 1986, it changed. So for various reasons, I felt like it would, even though I've been in this country for a long time, I shouldn't. I should retain my Japanese nationality. And finally, though, I think maybe it was the election coming up, or it was other thing. I was like, I should do it. And so it was a pandemic, but I finally became a U.S. citizen. I realized at that moment, I took the oath and became a U.S. that I am inheriting everything, whether I like it or not. When you become part of this, then you inherit all the karma of the past of this nation, whether we like it or not. And whether we acknowledge it or not, we're all interlinked with every part of this nation's history. So we may not think that we are linked to African American history or Native American history or white, but there's no way. It's inevitable that we are interlinked that way. This is my vantage point and experience even of when I became a U.S. citizen. What does it mean? The duties and responsibilities of citizenship. And so in that way, I feel like it has to be it's going to have the most meaning with Japanese Americans who have that personal connection to this, but it's got to be something that shows that interlinked nature of our nation, both in terms of each other today, but across time, and how that history transmits to us, both the positive and the negative things, and that it goes in our bodies and our minds. And to transform that karma is, a challenge for each generation. And so this is one small project to try to attend to that. Does that get to the, okay.
Hi, Duncan. You might know my sister Paula Irei.
Oh, yes,
yes,
of course.
I have a question for you. My show is in the gallery right now and behind you. One of the things that I learned, not having any connection to the camp legacy that we now live with, but how is this project reaching out, and how are you informing other communities such as the Mexican American, the African American, and the other parts of America that really make up this American quilt through which we are all interconnected?
So obviously I've tried to do my bit in terms of, I think there was a large group of African American pastors the other day who came to do stamps in the project. We had actually here in the Bay Area, Nancy Ukai, she organized something that I had the opportunity to also participate in. It was, when you said Mexican American, there was one family that back, there were 471, I think, mixed race, what they call mixed marriage families back in World War II that were affected by 9066. And so there's this one family where, his father was Japanese and mother Mexican American, and it was choice for the mother, who was Mexican American, and after Santa Anita, and they were able to exit after the assembly center, whereas the Japanese husband, went on through and actually died in one of the WRA camps, and so they never got to see each other again. And there was a reunion that Nancy organized of, I think it was like 110 or something. Like, it was a lot of people of Mexican American and Japanese heritage. There were also members of that family in Japan who flew all the way out to join. It was the 100th anniversary of the great-grandfather's birthday. So they had a birthday cake So anyway, this thing where we had, and a lot of those Mexican American were also married to African American, to Filipino, like it was a really multi-ethnic kind of group that came together because of this one family's so there've been lots of different occasions to have a kind of broader grouping of people. Everyone's one link connected, you know what I mean? So I think it's been happening, I think, in a very organic way. Obviously I've done some different things, and many of you, this is a big community effort. It's the only way. And it requires us to reach out to our friends in all kinds of communities to have an interest. And usually, at first, well, I don't know, then like they do it and they're like, oh, now I understand. And I can see, oh, I'm also connected to this. And so I think there's no other way than to do it and to do it in a very organic way. Yeah.
Hi, Duncan. Thanks for your great talk. So now we know what we're going to look for when we go there. So two questions. One's kind of minor, but can you put a stamp on more than one name? Mm-hmm. Okay, great.
Yes.
Good.
They used to have, this rule about you can only do it on 2 names. Then the staff got better because there's no page numbers, right? This is a book of names, and we wanted to make sure it looks monumental. Because there's no verse, like the names read across the gutter. So it's not a regular book, as it were, and there's no page number. So to get to the right page, this is Auntie so-and-so, this is Uncle Chip, we have to move quickly. And staff were a little bit slow, and so they got better over time, and now it's up to 6 names per 15-minute visit order. So they've gotten faster at being able to move across the pages. And so more and more names are and sometimes people take 2 appointment time. Oh, I should have mentioned that in the very beginning, the first few days, there were long lines, and we felt it was not good, especially camps, to have people wait in line for so long. And so we changed it to it's free and open to the public, obviously, but by reservation or appointment, and in these 15-minute slots. And so that's the process now. And then the staff really appreciate it if you know which names you want to, so that, and you let them know ahead of time, then they can move those pages even swifter.
But can you put more than one stamp on one name? So I go there and put a stamp on my grandfather's name. Can my cousin go and put a stamp on the... Okay.
And so let's say it's, Harry Noboru Yamashita. Harry Noboru. So there's, under every name, the size of the thing, it fits under a letter. And so however many names under. With that Mexican American family, there was so many people, although there were more than, there were cousins, and they could do it on different names, but we had to actually encircle the names and go to the side and do different things for when people come with a group of 100 people. Even most families, it's groups of 3, 5, 10, whatever. But obviously, if you have 100 people that want to do it, it becomes a little bit more complicated. But with a little bit more normal situation, it's more than manageable. And different cousins do come and place their acknowledgments.
And do you have a picture of that so we could see what it looks like on the book, on your
the 100 and whatever thing?
Yeah, or just one name.
Oh, sure.
So we could see what the book looks like when we go there.
Yes. If you go to, I shut down my computer. I'm sorry.
I think
I think if you go to social media, people putting also their something that happened the other day. Somebody sent me a photograph. Evergreen Cemetery in LA. They have their families. And somebody went to the museum, took a photograph of that page went home, printed it out, went to Evergreen Cemetery, put them in front of the grave, and was like, hey, report, hey, grandma, great grandpa, we went and acknowledged you there. And then we did that. So that kind of thing, like you never, when you do these things, you never know how it might spin out or how different people react or do things with it. But things like that, people have been taking photographs of themselves as they put the stamps on or once it's on there. So I think if you go to social, you'll find some examples, yeah.
I have a question for the audience.
Yes.
How many have already been and done a stamping at the Irei? So most of you have not. So, and it will be available at JANM until
December of 2024. And then to make an appointment, you just go online to JANM's site, and there's it's I think fairly straightforward to click the thing for reservations and then follow the prompts.
And I really do agree with what you said, is that because I was there with my sister and a friend, and our friend stamped her own name and her mother's name, but my sister and I chose to stamp the four names of a family that were very good friends of my grandparents, not our actual relatives. And it was really meaningful. And when I left, I thought, if I come back, I'm just already thinking of the people that my grandparents knew. And maybe that's who I should be stamping the next time I go. It's a very interesting, evolution.
Yeah, I think each individual or family might have a different, philosophy or approach as to how to do that, and that's part of the process as well.
We have time for a couple more questions. Okay, there were a couple of Zoom questions as well. Is it okay if maybe I ask a few questions sure. And then we can take them all? And then, okay. So there was one Zoom question from Kathy. How can we correct a name misspelled in the book? And then a comment and question from Deborah. I'm impressed and moved by the depth of meaning. Uh-oh, the chat just disappeared. I'm impressed and moved by the depth of meaning around all the Irei details. May I ask, how were decisions made about those details? A committee of some sort? What decisions were the most difficult on which to come to consensus? And then I think there were some from the audience as well, so however.
Sure. So the first one had to do with the
how to
correct the name. So on even though it's a beta site, and so we're not claiming it's all done yet. We're going to be launching the www.ireizo.com in October of this year. And that's when our collaboration with Densho is all going to be uploaded and whatnot as well. There's a little button on the top left-hand side, which is the kind of drop-down menu of all the things. You can search, once you get that drop-down, you can search a person by their name. You can hit a camp and it'll drop down to another menu, all the different, you can see all the people that were in a particular camp. But there's one little button called the amendment button. And that's the one you push to then let us know if there is a name that's misspelled or somebody's missing. Since launch, we've found, quite a few people, 60 some people who are missing. And then, or even if the birth year is wrong. So anything that's wrong, we want it to be correct. And so we invite that amendment. So it's done through the website, or if you go to the actual edition, they actually have these amendment forms at JANM, and you can fill them out, on paper as well. So that's the answer to that. As for the design decisions, I would say the creative director, who is my wife, pretty much made all the decisions, and without a committee. So I would have a say. John Sueda, who's a dean, had a say. Different people had says on design questions and whatnot. But it's one of the things where probably as a piece of artistic or creative work, it's better not done through a committee, because then Anyway, for different reasons, it's probably better just somebody has an artistic vision and you just do it, and then take the consequent, criticism. And usually they come to me if they're already criticism. As for the amendment, so I take all the responsibility if there are any names that are misspelled or anybody. That's my team, and we have certain rules. There were some decisions. I talked to different people. But ultimately, I made some rules about the names. And people may not like it, or I'm not sure, because I never really asked a committee or a group to formally endorse these rules. But I had 5 rules to determine, like, what if they're 2 different people, the same person, but listed differently on 2 different camp rosters, or sometimes even in the same camp roster, somebody gets married and have one name under the maiden name, what do you do when it's, varied? We have to have certain standards to have a consistent way to come up with an authoritative name to put in a book. Because on the website, you can have alternate names, maiden, all of that. But in a book of names, you can only choose one. So how do you choose it? So I came up with this 5-tiered rule. Oh, a lot of 5s. But the first one had to do with, it's called the rule of preponderance. If the preponderance of the evidence, let's say they're in 5 or 6 different DOJ camps or something, and most of the rosters had the name one way, and then only one had it a different. Usually I chose the one that the most of the evidence pointed towards. That's rule number 1. Rule number 2 is called the rule of maximalism. It means that if one roster had, John Hashimoto, and another one had John Hiroshi Hashimoto, and had the Japanese name, or reverse, one has the Anglo name. Like, we would take the maximal form of the name, just to respect the fact that somebody had both Japanese and Anglo. Like, we give the maximal name. So again, people may like it or not like, but I just decided we'll give people the maximal name possible. Number 3, the formal name. So if the one roster has like Teddy something, and the other one has Theodore something, it's like one of the ones the person wrote Theodore, and the other one they wrote Teddy. If you're gonna do a monument, I was like, let's pick the more formal one, because you have to pick one. So what are you gonna do? I was like, let's pick the more formal one. So that's rule number 3. Then rule number 4 was the rule of the name you go out of camp with is the name we're going to put in the book. So that marriage in camp thing is the usual one, and that one I did ask some people, usually some younger people, and I was like, do you know? I just did a random survey of like 30 younger Japanese Americans, and I was like, do you know your grandmother or great grandmother's maiden name? And almost inevitably, they did not. And so they knew the name that they then took on later. And so we realized, like, for the sake of later generations, if we have to choose a maiden or a married name, if they got married in camp and changed their last name, then we picked up the name they went out of camp with. Again, that one is the least, has no basis, I could have gone either way, but that one, it was just, I surveyed people and I was like, thinking 10, 20 years down the line, people are not going to know their, the maiden, know it less. And the last one was, had to do with camp survivors. I was like, if a camp survivor says, I want my name rendered thusly, even if it's not according to my rules, I'm going to respect that. And we will always respect a camp, but it's more complicated if it's like relatives. Because sometimes we've had like cousin X says, my uncle should be named like that, and cousin Y says, no, it should be named like that. And that we can't adjudicate. And so we're like, we'll go off what the person, they themselves, back in that period. And that's another kind of general focus, because it's the name they used during their wartime incarceration, not before or after. Especially if you got married after, change your name. We're going to use a name that was, written by so we have a kind of value ranking of different things. So for example, a World War II draft card, handwritten by the individual, generally going to trump the WRA final accountability roster because it's written by their own hand, signed by them, and so we value that as a slightly higher rank. So things like 1940 cents, we have lots of documents we use to make these adjudications, but we have a ranking system of that, and that I kind of just made up in my mind. But it has a logic to it. Like, if the person themselves wrote it, it's more likely than a clerical typist, especially a white clerical typist during World War II. That's often, we find like certain letters, there's lots of misspelled names and transposed letters and things like that. And so we want to get it right. And so we tend to privilege things that are written by the person themselves in that period. So things like that. Those are our rules. I didn't have a committee, but I probably did, some of you even, I may have asked a question here or there just to see, I probably did ask Brian Nia Densho a lot of things about his opinion about different things, but there was no formal committee or anything.
Okay, I think we have one last question.
This is an incredible project. How did you come up with this idea?
Sasuke, originally, this was a project, I think 2019 into 20. Sutra for Solidarity was doing the cranes, and there was supposed to be this gathering in Washington, D.C., 125, all the cranes were good. And I was part of the subcommittee or whatever to do the ceremony, and I thought we should recite the names. And then I had been working for some years on aspects of this, but it became like, well, then you need to have a list to read from, and all of the difficulties, and for example, well, first of all, lack of a full and properly vetted list became apparent, and so I think probably over 100 different people have participated in one way or another, done research on this, looked up, the other people who've been making lists. Densho's been doing some things. There's a team in Louisiana doing Camp Livingston. There's a team like Patricia Weger, Kuski list, the list at Fort Missoula. Like different people have been making lists. The Assembly Center people, memorial teams in Washington State and had so different people have been working on different things in Hawaii. So I was like, we need to all get together. Russ Endo for the Trinity Canyon. And we're like, let's get all the researchers together. And we started cooperating, and we realized we can actually help. Everyone's list is going to get better if we all work on it together. And so that was. And then they were like, you have to head it or do the work and take responsibility. So I decided, okay, I can do that. And so it was inspired by Tsuru. It was kind of sustained by all these other people who've been doing this kind of important work of just documenting names per camp. And we were like, let's just work collectively.
Well, I'd like to thank Duncan for responding to the questions and make a quick announcement before I turn it over to Kimmy Hill to close out the event. Jill has asked me to announce J-Sei's Summer Sunday Fun Day, Sunday, July 16th. From 11:30 to 3, there will be food, music, and booths here, and Sentimental Strummers will be playing, and you can find a flyer over there and more online, I'm sure. And here is Kimmy Hill.
Thank you once again, Duncan. What a fabulous talk. Really appreciate it. And I see that American Sutra is here, so if people would like to get a book, we have really good refreshments, so please help yourself. The gallery, of course, is still open, And thank you everyone for coming. We really appreciate it. Thanks.